Settle in and let your breathing slow, because the Arctic is not a place that rushes. You think night is a moment, a clean switch from light to dark, but up here, it is a season, steady and unbothered. The air feels sharp and clean, like it has been rinsed, and every sound travels too far across snow and sea ice. Tonight, with your quiet company, the Sleepless Geographer walks you through what surviving the polar night is actually like. Not the dramatic version, just the real one. A temporary floor of ice that creaks like old wood, wind that redraws the world in silence, and a sky that sometimes remembers to glow, softly, for no one in particular. You step into the first hour without sun, and you learn something simple. The dark is not a curtain. It is a setting. Like the whole planet turned down its brightness and forgot the password. At first, your eyes keep expecting a reveal, a glow on the horizon, a delayed sunrise that got stuck in traffic, but the horizon stays quiet, a thin seam where snow-colored land meets snow-colored sky. This is the part most people misunderstand. You think the polar night is a single dramatic darkness. Wrong. It is a long, steady dimness that settles in and refuses to hurry. In many Arctic places, the sun does not rise for weeks. Sometimes, not because the sun is gone, obviously, but because you are standing on a tilted planet, and the tilt is doing what it always does. Earth leans. That is the whole secret. The Arctic simply gets the long end of the shadow. You feel it in your routine before you feel it in your mood. Time stops being a bright line of morning, noon, and evening. It becomes a soft loop of tasks. Heat, water, food, rest, repeat, and the cold. The cold is not just a temperature. It is a behavior the world adopts. Your breath comes out in a pale ribbon, and then it is gone. The air feels clean and a little metallic, like a coin held too long. Each inhale feels like it has edges, not sharp enough to cut you, but sharp enough to remind you. Sound does strange things here. Snow and ice flatten the world, and the air can be calm and dense. A footstep travels. A zipper sounds like a tiny thunderclap. You hear your own clothing working, fabric rubbing, seams flexing, the quiet click of a buckle. It is not loud, it is simply uncovered by the absence of everything else. And the sky has texture, even when it looks empty. Stars are not the pointy glitter you remember from warmer places. They feel closer, not brighter, just nearer, like you could reach up and smudge them. Sometimes there is a moon, pale and washed out, hovering with no warmth to offer. Sometimes there are clouds, and clouds do not always mean darkness. They can glow faintly, reflecting light from ice, from distant settlements, from the moon itself. You learn quickly that night is not just black. Night has shades, night has weather. And because you do not get a sunrise to announce the day, you start measuring time differently. You measure it by the stove, by the fuel, by the wind. You check the air the way you would check a person's mood. You look for drift lines in the snow, the little clues that say the wind changed direction while you were busy being human. You become cautious in a way that feels old-fashioned, not fearful, just realistic. In the Arctic, confidence is a resource you can waste. The first hour without sun teaches you another lesson too. Your body still tries to live by its usual rules. Inside you, a clock insists that light should arrive. It wants proof that the world is still turning. So, you borrow proof from routine, hot drink at the same time, food at the same time, lamps turned on in a steady rhythm. People who live here do not fight the dark with endless brightness. They manage it like a long task. Warm light indoors, small pools of yellow against the window, framing the outside instead of trying to defeat it. And outside, you start noticing how the ground under you is not exactly ground, because what you call the Arctic in winter is often not land. It is ocean wearing a winter coat and pretending to be stable. And once your eyes accept the dark, you start noticing what the cold is quietly building beneath your feet. Sea ice is the temporary floor, and it does not want your trust. It wants your attention. You step out onto it, and for a moment, it feels like a frozen parking lot. Flat, white, solid enough to make you forget what it really is. But sea ice is not a continent. It is not bedrock. It is water, paused. And water does not like being told what to do. Sea ice forms when the ocean surface cools enough to freeze. Not all at once. Not like a lake snapping shut in a movie. It starts as crystals, tiny plates and needles that swirl in the top layer. In calm conditions, those crystals knit together into a thin skin. New ice, young ice, the kind that looks confident until it meets a boot. It thickens slowly from below. The ocean loses heat to the air, and the ice grows downward like a patient ceiling. If you could look at a slice of it, you would see layers and bubbles and trapped salt. Because sea ice is not pure. As it forms, it pushes out salt into the water below. Not all of it, but enough to matter. That salt rejection makes the water beneath colder and heavier. It sinks, sliding down into deeper layers like a slow underwater sigh. You walk on the surface, but the ice is always negotiating with the forces around it. Wind pushes it, currents pull it, temperature tightens and loosens it. And so the ice cracks, not as a disaster, but as a normal conversation. Sometimes you hear it before you see it. A long, low groan, like a ship, a pop, sharp and sudden, like a wooden beam adjusting in a cold house. Congratulations, you are standing on something that is alive enough to complain. A large sheet of sea ice is called a floe, and floes do not sit still politely. They drift, they rotate, they bump into each other with the slow irritation of shopping carts in a windy parking lot. When two floes collide, the ice has to go somewhere. It cannot politely merge because it is rigid. So it breaks and piles and builds pressure ridges. Pressure ridges are the Arctic's messy handwriting. Frozen waves shoved upward, slabs stacked at odd angles, a jagged wall of ice that can rise higher than a person. Underneath, the ridge has a deep keel too. What you see above the surface is only the visible part of the argument. Below you, more ice is rammed downward, making a thick, uneven obstacle in the water. Pressure ridges are beautiful in a harsh way. They catch moonlight. They throw hard shadows. They look like a ruined city built for no one. They are also a warning. They tell you the ice has been under stress, squeezed and broken and forced into shape. And then there are leads, the cracks that open into black water. A lead can be a thin line, a dark vein running across the white, or it can be wide enough to feel like a sudden canyon, a gap that splits your route into before and after. You approach carefully, because open water in polar night is not just water, it is heat escaping. When the air is far colder than the sea, the open water steams. Not like a boiling pot, more like the ocean exhaling, making a low fog that drifts and curls. That fog can freeze into tiny ice crystals, a shimmer in your headlamp beam. It can coat your eyelashes. It can turn your scarf stiff. Leads appear and vanish. Wind pushes ice apart and then pushes it back together. Currents tug from below, widening a crack without asking permission. Sometimes new ice forms over a lead overnight, thin and dark and deceptively smooth. It can look like safe ground, but it is only a fresh scab. If you travel here, you learn to read the ice the way you read a person's face. Color matters. Texture matters. Older ice often looks brighter and rougher. Younger ice can be darker, smoother, sometimes with a gray-blue tone. Snow hides these clues, which is part of the fun. And by fun, I mean this is why people carry poles. You probe ahead, you tap, you listen, because the ice speaks. If you do not talk over it, it is not just about thickness, it is about structure. Ice can be thick and still dangerous if it is fractured. It can be thin but strong in places and weak in others. It can be honeycombed by warming and refreezing, like a sponge that learned to be solid. You do not need to know every scientific term to respect it, but the science is there, humming underneath your boots. Sea ice is shaped by temperature, yes, but also by motion, and motion is constant. Even when everything looks still, the Arctic Ocean is moving. Slowly, stubbornly, endlessly. That means the ice is always being restitched. A crack opens, then freezes, then opens again a little farther. A ridge forms, then gets buried in drifting snow, turning into a hidden wall. And your job, if you are trying to survive here, is not to conquer it. Your job is to negotiate. You move in shorter distances. You choose routes that follow safer ice if you can tell what safer means today. You accept detours because the straight line is often a trap. This is what sea ice does to the human mind. It makes you humble, one careful step at a time. And while the ocean freezes on top, the real Arctic stays awake below. Moving water, moving heat, moving life. Under the dark, the ocean keeps its own schedule. It does not care that the sun is absent from your sky. It has currents that were flowing before your species had words for flowing. You stand on ice, and beneath you is salt water that refuses to freeze entirely. Because salt changes the rules. Fresh water freezes at a familiar point, neat and simple. Salt water needs to get colder before it freezes, and even then, it does not freeze cleanly. So the ocean can stay liquid under a skin of ice, even when the air above feels like it could preserve history. This water is layered, not like oil and vinegar in a bottle, but like a careful stacking of different densities. Saltier water is heavier. Colder water is heavier. Fresher water is lighter. When sea ice forms and rejects salt, that saltier water sinks. It slides down, feeding deeper currents, helping drive circulation that can travel far beyond the Arctic. You have heard of the ocean as a conveyor belt, a global circulation. Up here, you can almost feel the mechanism, even if you cannot see it. Warmth arrives from far away, carried by currents that began their journey in places where rain falls and people forget gloves. That warmth is not dramatic. It is not a tropical surprise. It is subtle, a small difference that decides whether ice grows thicker or whether it stalls. Where water meets ice, the underside of the ice is sculpted. You do not see it from above, but it is there, a hidden ceiling with soft curves. The bottom of sea ice can look like rolling hills turned upside down. It can have channels where water flowed, pockets where brine drained, ridges mirrored below. And sometimes the ocean refuses to close at all. Polynias are areas of open water that persist within sea ice. They are like stubborn doorways in a house trying to stay shut. Some polynas form because of wind. The wind pushes ice away from a coast or a consistent spot, and the water stays exposed. Some form because of warm water upwelling, heat rising from below, keeping a patch of ocean from freezing over. To you, standing in polar night, a polynia is a warning and a promise. Warning because open water is danger. Promise because where there is open water, there is life. Birds may gather near it. Marine mammals may surface there to breathe. The air above can be thicker with moisture, a faint haze, a smell of sea that seems almost impossible in the cold. And the ice around it can be thinner, newer, constantly forming and breaking again. A place always in progress. You start to understand something calming in an unsettling way. The sea is never truly still. It just learns to move without being seen. Even in the months of darkness, even under meters of ice, it keeps flowing. It keeps mixing. It keeps rearranging heat, salt, and nutrients like a slow, patient chef. This hidden motion is part of why the Arctic matters to the rest of the planet. It helps shape weather far away. It helps store and release heat over seasons and years. But here, in your small bubble of headlamp light, you experience it more simply. You experience it as a floor that shifts because the ocean beneath is not asleep. And when the wind arrives, it takes all that hidden motion and translates it into weather you can feel on your face. The wind in the Arctic is not just air moving. It is a force that edits the world. It comes across sea ice with very little to stop it. No forests to tangle it. No hills to soften it. It slides low and fast, and it finds every seam in your clothing. It reminds you that warmth is something you are borrowing. Snow, in this wind, does not fall politely downward. It travels sideways, low to the ground, like a ghost that refuses to rise. Sometimes, you can watch it stream across the surface in thin sheets, a phenomenon that makes the ice look alive, like the ground is moving when it is only being sandblasted. This is how the landscape gets redrawn, not by bulldozers, by wind and tiny crystals. A drift forms behind anything that interrupts airflow. A ridge, a rock, a tent, a single raised edge of ice. Snow collects there, grain by grain, building gentle shapes that look soft. They are not soft. They pack hard, compressed by wind, sealed like a crust. You can run a glove across a drift and feel the surface resist. It is smooth, but it has weight. It is like the world has been polished and lacquered. And then the storm arrives, and the air becomes crowded. A blizzard is not always loud the way you imagine. Sometimes it is loud up close, wind scraping at your hood, snow hissing against fabric. But inside the blizzard, something strange can happen. The world becomes a white curtain, and the sound can flatten. Your vision shrinks to a small sphere. Your sense of direction becomes a guess. Even familiar landmarks vanish, swallowed by moving whiteness. In polar night, this can feel like darkness inside darkness, a double absence. You are not just without sun, you are without horizon. And this is where survival gets boring, in the most important way. You do not heroically push onward. You go small. You add layers, not because it looks rugged, but because it slows heat loss. You cover skin, because frostbite is a quiet thief. You limit sweat, because wet clothing is a betrayal that arrives later. You build shelter, or you stay put, because getting lost is easier than you think. The Arctic teaches patience by force. The storm does not care about your schedule. It does not respect your plans. So you wait it out, listening to the wind do its work. You drink something hot, not as a luxury, but as a practical act of staying functional. And when you step back outside after the worst has passed, you see what the wind did. A familiar surface is now different. A ridge is buried. A smooth patch is scraped clean. Your tracks are gone. Your certainty is gone with them. Wind is the main storyteller here. It writes in snow, then erases, then writes again. And as you spend long enough in that cycle, you start to notice the way the cold itself shapes endurance. Cold is not merely discomfort. Cold changes materials. Plastic becomes brittle. Metal becomes sharp to touch. Batteries fade faster, like they are getting sleepy too. Fuel thickens. Small mechanical things refuse to cooperate. Congratulations. You have entered a place where even your equipment wants to take the night off. So you adjust. You keep essentials close to your body. You plan for simple failures. You treat your own body like equipment that needs maintenance. Food on schedule. Water that does not freeze. Sleep when you can. And in the long dark, you begin to understand that endurance is not intensity. It is repetition. The Arctic does not reward drama. It rewards steadiness. And when the storm calms, the sky sometimes offers something delicate. Light that doesn't warm you, but does reassure you. It starts as a faint stain in the dark, a milky brightening that has no business being called dawn. You look up and realize the sky is not empty at all. It is busy. It is layered. It is doing physics in slow motion. A pale arc appears above the horizon, and it does not rise. It just lingers as if the planet is considering the idea of morning, then deciding against it. And then, without warning, the darkness gets decorated. The first time you see Aurora, you assume it will light the ground. You expect the snow to glow green, like a stage under colored lamps. Wrong. The Aurora is mostly for the sky itself. It is a private performance, happening high above your practical problems. You stand on ice and wind-packed snow, and the lights unfurl overhead, thin at first, a faint ribbon, like someone drew a line with a dim marker across the stars. Then it thickens and folds and ripples, curtains shaken gently in a draft. The colors do not look loud, they look clean. Green is the usual shade, a cool green that feels almost clinical. Sometimes you catch a bruise of purple at the edges. If conditions are generous, there is a smear of red higher up, rarer, quieter, like the sky blushing and trying to hide it. You can watch it for a long time, and it never quite repeats itself. It pulses, it stretches, it breaks into arcs, then stitches itself back together. It moves as if it has joints, as if it is alive, but it is only charged particles and magnetic fields doing what they do. Here is the part that makes it feel unreal. The aurora starts at the sun, a place that seems impossibly far away from your cold little world. The sun throws off a stream of particles, a solar wind, always flowing. Most days, it is steady, like background noise. Some days, when the sun is irritated, it throws more. Storms of particles, extra energy, extra trouble. Those particles race outward and find Earth waiting. Not waiting politely, waiting with a magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is like an invisible cage, a shield that bends those particles around. It is why compasses behave most of the time. It is why some radiation does not make it to your skin. And it is why the polar regions get the show. Near the poles, the magnetic field lines dip down toward the planet. They make pathways, funnels, places where incoming particles can spiral in. When those particles slam into the upper atmosphere, they excite atoms up there, mostly oxygen, sometimes nitrogen. Excited atoms are like people who got too much caffeine. They cannot stay that way. They settle back down, and when they do, they release energy as light. That green you see is often oxygen, glowing at a particular height. The red, when it appears, is oxygen too, just higher up, in thinner air. The purples and blues tend to involve nitrogen, adding extra colors to the edges. It is clean science, which is almost rude in a place that feels mystical. You want it to be spirits, or ancient legends, or the sky cracking open. But no, it is electricity and magnetism, delivered through a planet-sized machine. And still, you cannot help feeling small under it, because the aurora teaches you something about distance. The thing above you is not close. It is not hanging low over the sea ice like fog. It is happening high overhead, in the upper atmosphere, far above the weather that is biting your cheeks. So you watch, and the lights do what they do, and the ground stays the same. Cold, dark, patient, unlit. Sometimes the aurora is so faint you question it, a grayish smear, a suggestion. Then you lift a camera or your phone, and the sensor sees what your tired eyes cannot. The screen shows green that was never obvious. Congratulations, even your technology is better adapted than your biology tonight. But the people who live here learn a different skill. They learn to wait without demanding payoff. They glance up, they notice, they keep walking. Because if you stop every time the sky does something interesting, you will never finish hauling water. The aurora is a reminder, not of warmth, but of connection. You are standing at the edge of the world, and still the sun can reach you. Not with heat, with consequences. And while you watch the sky burn quietly, you start to notice the land beneath you doing its own slow violence. Because the Arctic is not only ice on the surface, it is cold that has seeped downward into soil and sediment, into the bones of the ground. It is a place where the earth remembers winter and refuses to forget it. Permafrost sounds like a product you buy in a spray can. It is not. It is soil and rock that stay frozen for at least 2 years in a row, and usually much longer. Decades, centuries, in some places, thousands of years. You walk over it and think you are on ordinary ground. But ordinary ground has a water cycle that moves freely. Rain sinks down, drains away, disappears into deeper layers. Here, the frozen ground blocks that movement. In the warm season, the surface thaws a little. Not a deep thaw, more like the top layer loosens, just enough to become soft. That layer is called the active layer because it is the only part that behaves like normal soil. It is thin, and it is moody, and it changes year to year. Below it, the permafrost stays locked. Frozen soil can be as hard as concrete, sometimes harder, because it is not just frozen water, it is frozen water holding grains of earth in place, like glue that never melts. That means when summer arrives and meltwater and rain appear, the water cannot sink very far. It collects near the surface. It spreads out. It makes ponds and soggy ground in places that look like they should be dry. You can stand on a flat tundra plain and see little pools everywhere, shallow, dark, rimmed with ice even in warmer months. This is not because the Arctic is wet in the way tropics are wet. It is wet because it cannot drain. In polar night, that surface layer is frozen again. Snow covers it, insulating it, keeping it from losing too much heat too quickly. Snow is not just decoration. It is a blanket. A thick snowpack can actually make the ground warmer than you expect because it traps heat that would otherwise radiate away. So you have this strange arrangement. Air that can be brutally cold, snow that insulates, ground that is frozen but not always as cold as the air. The Arctic is always negotiating temperatures in layers, like a complicated cake no one asked for. And the permafrost is not uniform. Some permafrost is rich in ice, with lenses and wedges frozen into it. Ice wedges form when the ground contracts in extreme cold and cracks. In spring and summer, meltwater fills those cracks. Then it freezes. Repeat that cycle enough times, and you build a wedge of ice that can be wider than a person. From above, ice wedges can create polygon patterns on the tundra's surface. Geometric shapes, faint lines, as if the land is tiled. It looks artistic, but it is just stress fractures and refreezing over and over. In polar night, you cannot see those polygons easily, but you can feel what they imply. The ground is not a single solid thing. It is a structure made of soil, ice, and trapped history. Because permafrost is a freezer, and like any freezer, it preserves what gets stuck inside. Plant material, roots, old moss, the remains of animals, all of it can be held in place, not fully decomposing. In some places, permafrost holds ancient organic carbon, locked away because microbes cannot work well in deep freeze. This is where the Arctic gets quietly unsettling. When permafrost warms and thaws, that stored organic material becomes available again. Microbes wake up like tiny workers returning to an abandoned factory. They start breaking down that material, releasing gases, including CO2 and methane. Methane is especially dramatic. Even when it is invisible, it traps heat more effectively than CO2 over shorter timescales. So thawing permafrost can feed warming, and warming can thaw more permafrost. A feedback loop, the planet's least comforting habit. But you do not need to think about global climate to understand permafrost as a practical reality. You only need to watch what it does to the surface. When ice-rich permafrost thaws, the ground can collapse. This is called thermokarst, which sounds like a theme park, but behaves more like a slow disaster. Imagine a sponge made of soil and ice. Remove the ice, and the soil loses volume. It settles, slumps, sinks. The surface becomes uneven. Pits and hollows, tilted ground, sagging areas that fill with water. Roads crack. Foundations shift. Buildings lean just enough to be annoying, then just enough to be dangerous. In some Arctic towns, houses are built on piles lifted above the ground. Not for style, for survival. The airspace underneath helps keep heat from the building from thawing the permafrost. Because if you warm the ground under your home becomes an accidental excavation project. Pipes are a problem too. In many places, water and sewage pipes run above ground in insulated corridors. It looks strange to outsiders, like the town is built with exposed veins. But burying pipes in permafrost is asking them to freeze, break, and turn maintenance into a year-round hobby. And then there are the little everyday betrayals. A fuel tank settling unevenly. A door that no longer closes cleanly. A boardwalk that warps because the posts beneath it shifted. Congratulations! Your enemy is not a bear tonight. It is the ground changing its mind. You might think permafrost makes the land stable because frozen things feel firm. But stability is not the same as rigidity. Permafrost is stable only as long as it stays frozen. And the Arctic is warming faster than many other regions. Even without modern warming, permafrost has always had edges. South-facing slopes can thaw deeper. Riverbanks can erode, exposing frozen soil to flowing water. Coastal cliffs can crumble when waves chew into them, releasing blocks of ice-rich sediment into the sea. Along some Arctic coasts, you can see erosion happening fast, not the slow patience you expect from cold places. Storms hit, waves undercut frozen bluffs, and whole sections collapse. The ocean does not care that the ground was frozen for thousands of years. It eats it anyway. And the irony is that permafrost is both hard and fragile. Hard when it is intact, fragile when it is disturbed. If you dig into permafrost, you expose it. If you remove insulating vegetation, you warm it. If you build a road that changes drainage, you can concentrate heat and water. Small human changes can have outsized effects because the system is already balanced on cold. But permafrost is not only a threat, it shapes ecosystems too, because water trapped near the surface creates wetlands, and wetlands, even in the Arctic, can be productive in summer. They grow sedges and mosses, they support insects, they feed birds, they create pockets of life that seem impossible when you are standing in winter darkness. You start to see the Arctic as a place built from constraints. Cold is a constraint. Darkness is a constraint. And Life does not fight constraints with heroism. Life solves them with strategy. Small, quiet, stubborn strategy. The plants here do not grow tall because tall is expensive. Tall catches wind. Tall loses heat. Tall demands a long growing season, and the Arctic laughs at that demand. So plants stay low. They hug the ground like they are trying to eavesdrop on the little bit of warmth stored there. They form mats and cushions, tight clusters that trap air and resist wind. Some Arctic shrubs, like dwarf birch and willow, look like miniature versions of trees, not bonsai shaped by human hands, bonsai shaped by climate. They spread sideways more than upward, crawling rather than climbing. And then there are mosses and lichens. They are the quiet skin of the Arctic, living on rocks, soil, old wood, anything that will hold still long enough. Lichens are partnerships, a fungus with algae or cyanobacteria, cooperating because neither can do it alone out here. They grow slowly, sometimes only a few millimeters per year, which means a lichen patch can be older than a human life without looking impressive. Mosses hold moisture, creating little micro-worlds. They insulate the ground, affecting permafrost temperatures. They build peat over time, layers of partially decomposed plant matter that can store carbon like a savings account no one planned to touch. In the long dark of winter, these plants are not growing. They are waiting. Their activity slows, their chemistry stays ready, like a machine in standby mode. When light returns, they will take advantage quickly, because the Arctic growing season is short and it does not care if you are prepared. Animals here follow the same rule. Do not waste energy. In polar night, you do not see constant movement. You see stillness and then sudden purpose. An Arctic fox may appear as a pale shape against snow, moving with quick, economical steps. It listens more than it looks. Its ears are not decorative, they are radar. A fox can hear small animals under snow, then pounce, breaking through the crust. That crust matters. Snow is not just snow, it has layers created by wind, melt, refreeze. A hard crust can support a fox, but also protect the prey underneath. Lemmings and other small rodents create tunnels in the snowpack. The space between ground and snow can be warmer than the air above. It is called the subnivean space, the world under the snow. Down there, small animals move through insulated corridors, feeding on plants, avoiding wind. It is not safe, but it is safer than being exposed. Owls and foxes hunt by listening for movement under that snow. So the prey moves carefully, and the predator listens carefully, and the whole system becomes an economy of sound. In polar night, sound is often more useful than sight. The darkness makes eyes less reliable. Wind can erase tracks, but sound travels, especially in cold air. A raven's call can carry far. The soft crunch of snow under hooves can announce a herd before you see it. The exhale of a seal at a breathing hole can be a sudden, startling presence in the dark. Some animals leave for the season. Many birds migrate south, chasing sunlight and open water. Others stay, ptarmigan turning white, blending in, trading speed for camouflage. Caribou, also called reindeer in many regions, move across tundra in winter, digging through snow to reach lichens. Their hooves are tools, scraping and pawing. They follow routes shaped by wind, because wind scours ridges, leaving thinner snow. Where snow is thin, food is closer. So even the wind you dislike is feeding someone. Marine life continues under ice. Seals maintain breathing holes, scraping away new ice with claws. Polar bears, if they are present in your region, patrol those holes, using smell to find seal scent across ice. A bear in polar night is not a roaring monster most of the time. It is a pale mass moving quietly, conserving energy, a predator shaped by scarcity. And scarcity is the theme. Everything in the Arctic is budgeting. Energy in, energy out. Warmth in, warmth lost. Movement gained, movement paid for. That budgeting applies to you too, whether you like it or not. If you live here through polar night, you learn that comfort is a system, not a moment. You build routines because routines save energy. You keep tools where you can find them in the dark. You do not leave tasks for later, because later might arrive with wind and erase your options. Homes in Arctic communities are shaped by these lessons. They are built to hold heat and resist wind, yes, but also to manage transitions. Entryways often act like airlocks. You step into a small vestibule, close the outer door, then open the inner door. This keeps warm air from pouring out every time someone remembers they left something in the truck. Windows are not huge, not because people dislike views, but because glass leaks heat. Where windows are large, they are often multiple panes, designed to keep cold outside and condensation controlled. Insulation is the quiet hero. Walls packed thick, roofs designed to shed snow without creating dangerous overhangs. Everything shaped by the simple fact that heat is expensive here, and light becomes a tool, not a decoration. In polar night, you do not keep every room brightly lit all day. That would feel like living in a supermarket, and your brain would protest. Instead, people choose warm lamps, low glows, small pools of light that make the dark outside feel less aggressive. Some use light therapy lamps at certain times to help their bodies keep a rhythm, because the human body, for all its confidence, still expects daylight cues. Melatonin rises, sleepiness shifts, mood can drift. You learn that surviving polar night is partly geology and meteorology, and partly psychology. Time becomes something you manufacture. Meals become anchors. Work schedules become artificial suns. In research stations and remote camps, the routine can feel almost ceremonial. Breakfast at the same hour, equipment checks, weather observations, short outings when conditions allow, then back inside, where the air is warm and smells faintly of fuel, food, and human presence. Supply lines matter more than most people want to admit. Food and fuel are not background details, they are lifelines. In many Arctic places, supplies arrive by ship during a short, ice-free season, or by air when weather allows. In winter, storms can shut down flights, and sea ice can shut down ships. So communities plan ahead, storing fuel, storing food, making the most of the accessible season. You can feel the length of those supply lines in the way people talk. Not panicked, just practical. When you run out of fresh produce, you adjust. When fuel deliveries are delayed, you ration. When a storm keeps planes grounded for days, you wait because there is nothing else to do. And that waiting becomes part of the culture. Shared meals, small gatherings, stories told the way they have always been told in dark seasons, anywhere humans have ever lived. Because polar night is not unique in its challenge. It is just more honest about it. Humans everywhere have winters, hardships, shortages. The Arctic simply removes the illusion that you are in control. In a long night, your world shrinks to what you can maintain. Heat, light, food, connection. Connection matters more than you expect. Isolation in darkness can make the mind loud, so people create steadiness together. A neighbor checks in. Someone shares soup. Someone fixes a snow machine, not because they love mechanics, but because everyone needs it to work. You start to notice that the heroic stories about the Arctic, the ones with flags and triumph, miss the point. Survival here is mostly maintenance. It is keeping the same small systems running day after day. It is washing dishes when you would rather stare at the wall. It is shoveling snow before it turns into a hard drift you cannot move. It is fixing a door seal so your house stops bleeding warmth. It is checking on elders. It is keeping your sense of humor, because humor is another kind of insulation. And even when you do everything right, the environment still has opinions. A storm can isolate you. A pressure ridge can block a route. A sudden warming can make ice less predictable. A cold snap can freeze machinery that worked yesterday. So you keep contingency plans. You keep extra supplies. You keep the habit of not trusting a single solution. This is why the Arctic, in its own way, makes people competent. Not glamorous, competent. And competence feels calm. It feels like knowing what to do next, even when the sky is black at noon. But while you are busy with human problems, the bigger landscape is still changing around you, slowly, insistently, with the patience of deep time. Because the Arctic is not just sea ice and tundra, it is also glaciers, and the scars they carved, and the ocean-filled valleys they left behind. And the strange thing is, you can be in polar night and still hear ice moving, not the wind-pushed sea ice, not the surface cracking, a different sound, deeper, more distant, a low boom from far across a fjord, a sharp crack like a rifle shot, echoing off rock walls. A glacier is a river that forgot how to hurry. It flows, but so slowly you cannot see it happen in a moment. You notice it by what it does, what it grinds, what it carries, what it leaves behind. Glacier ice begins as snow. Snow piles up year after year, compressing. Air gets squeezed out, crystals recrystallize, and the snow becomes dense ice. Over time, gravity does the rest. The ice deforms under its own weight. It creeps downhill, not sliding like a block, but flowing internally, like very cold honey that takes its time. As it moves, it drags rock. It plucks boulders from bedrock. It scrapes surfaces. It grinds mountains into powder. That powder is called rock flour. And when meltwater carries it, the water looks milky, pale blue or gray. It is not pollution. It is stone, ground so fine it stays suspended. You can see it in summer more clearly, in rivers coming off glaciers. But even in the dark season, you can find its evidence along shores and valleys, fine sediment, smooth surfaces, Rounded stones? Glaciers carve in a way rivers cannot. Rivers cut V-shaped valleys. Glaciers fill valleys and grind them into U-shapes, wide floors and steep walls. When glaciers reach the sea, they can calve. Chunks break off into the water, becoming icebergs. In polar night, you might hear calving more than you see it. A crack, then a heavy splash, then a rolling rumble as waves slap the ice. It sounds like the landscape rearranging itself, because it is. Fjords are one of the glacier's most dramatic signatures. A fjord is a deep valley carved by glacier ice, later flooded by the sea. They are long, narrow arms of ocean, flanked by steep rock, often with a shallow sill near the mouth. That sill matters. It can trap water in the fjord, affecting circulation, affecting oxygen levels, shaping marine life. It is like a bathtub with a lip, holding onto its own cold, dense water. In polar night, fjords can be quiet, a dark surface, sometimes with thin ice, sometimes with open water where currents keep it moving. The surrounding mountains loom, and the sound of anything carries, echoing. You realize that darkness makes geography feel closer. A mountain you cannot fully see feels nearer than it is. A shoreline you cannot quite trace feels like it could be right beside you. And the ice? Always the ice keeps speaking. Glaciers crack because they are under stress. As they flow over uneven ground, they bend and fracture. Crevasses open, deep cracks that can be hidden by snow. A crevasse is not a polite hazard. It is a negative space, a gap that can swallow a person. In polar night, with low visibility and drifting snow, it is a reminder that the Arctic is not only cold, it is full of traps that look like smooth ground. If you travel on glaciers, you rope up. Not because you are being dramatic, but because you are being realistic. And while the glacier moves slowly, it can also move suddenly. Some glaciers surge, speeding up for reasons that can involve water at the base, changes in friction, internal dynamics. For years they creep, then for months they lunge forward, advancing dramatically. It is rare, but it is part of the lesson. Even slow systems can have sudden moments. That is what the Arctic is when you zoom out, a place of slow processes punctuated by sharp events. Freeze and thaw, crack and refreeze, build up and collapse, advance and retreat. In polar night, you are living inside one part of a long cycle, and it is easy to think of the Arctic as static, a frozen postcard. But the Arctic is not frozen in time. It is actively reshaping itself, often faster than you expect. Sea ice grows and shrinks each year. Glaciers thin and retreat in many regions. Permafrost warms and slumps. Coasts erode, storm tracks shift, and humans, standing in the middle of it, build lives anyway. Because humans always do. There is a certain stubbornness to it, almost admirable. Also, slightly ridiculous. You build a town on permafrost and spend the next decades trying to keep the permafrost frozen. You drive across sea ice that is never truly still. You ship food across oceans because nothing grows here in winter. You install lights to mimic a sun you cannot summon. Congratulations, you have chosen a place where nature does not negotiate. So you learn to negotiate with yourself instead. And as the long night continues, you start noticing how your own sense of time changes again. Not just the daily rhythm, but your sense of scale. When you live without sunrise, days blur. When you travel across ice shaped by wind, distance feels uncertain. When you hear glaciers crack in the dark, you start thinking in years, not hours. You begin to understand deep time, not as an abstract concept, but as a feeling. A glacier does not care if you are impatient. Permafrost does not care if you need a stable foundation by next week. Sea ice does not care if your route is inconvenient. The planet is doing what it does: slow, heavy, continuous. And strangely, that can be comforting, because your worries, in comparison, are small and temporary. Your plans are light enough to be blown sideways. Your problems, while real, are not permanent fixtures in the landscape. The Arctic teaches you that cycles do not require your attention to continue. They simply do. Dark season arrives, ice forms, wind moves it, snow drifts, currents flow under it. Light returns later on its own schedule. And even the stars, the ones you stare at when you cannot sleep, are part of a deeper cycle. They rotate overhead because Earth turns. Earth turns because it always has. You are just here to notice it for a while. But noticing is a kind of participation. You are not separate from this place. You are breathing its cold air. You are losing heat to its wind. You are adapting your habits to its darkness. You are, in a small way, becoming Arctic, not by conquering anything, by learning the quiet rules. Freeze does not mean still. Dark does not mean empty. Silence does not mean safe. And you can feel that lesson in the ground beneath you, in the ice that shifts, in the permafrost that holds, in the glaciers that move like sleeping animals. The long night keeps going, not dramatic, not theatrical, just steady. And somewhere beyond your headlamp's reach, the planet keeps turning, carrying you through darkness toward whatever comes next, while the wind waits to rewrite the snow again. And the rewrite is never just cosmetic. It is mechanical, because the moment the wind eases, the cold goes back to work on the details. You start hearing it again. Small noises that storms usually swallow. A faint tick from ice contracting. A dry, papery crunch as your boot compresses snow crystals into something denser. The Arctic is quiet, but it is never truly silent. It is just selective. Out here, change does not announce itself with fireworks. It shows up as a new ridge where there was a flat stretch yesterday. It shows up as a different taste in the air, less salt, more dryness. Because the wind shifted, it shows up as the simple fact that your known route is suddenly not quite yours. And you realize, slowly, that snow is not a single thing. Snow is a whole library of textures, each page written by temperature and wind. Fresh snow can be feathery, squeaky, and light. Old snow can be gritty and sharp, like tiny broken glass. Wind-packed snow becomes a hard skin, the kind that holds your weight. Until it does not, the surface can look smooth and innocent, but the layers beneath are complicated. A warm spell can create a crust. A refreeze can lock that crust into place. New snow can bury it, turning it into a hidden tabletop you might fall through. This layering matters for everything. It matters for animals under the snow. It matters for you when you step off a safe ridge into a drift that swallows your leg. It matters for the simplest things, like how far you can pull a sled before your patience turns brittle. Congratulations! You have entered a place where even the ground has paperwork. But the cold does not only shape snow, it shapes rock too, slowly, methodically, with a process that feels almost petty. If you stand near an exposed cliff in deep winter, you might hear a faint crack. Not thunderous, just a tight snap, like a twig breaking. That is frost wedging, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Water seeps into tiny cracks in rock. Then it freezes. Ice expands slightly, and the crack widens. It happens again and again, each cycle a quiet lever. Over enough winters, a solid-looking cliff face starts shedding pieces. Small flakes at first, then rocks, then whole slabs. If the fractures line up just right, you are not watching a mountain fall in a night. You are watching a mountain lose an argument, one tiny push at a time. The Arctic is full of this patient destruction. It is not the dramatic erosion of warm rivers and jungles. It is dry, cold weathering, mechanical work done by freezing water and relentless temperature swings. And it leaves debris everywhere. Talus slopes, piles of broken rock collect beneath steep faces. In summer, meltwater runs through that rubble. In winter, it locks together and waits. Even in darkness, even in a place you think of as frozen and finished, the land is being taken apart, just slowly enough that you can pretend it is stable. And because the Arctic is like this, you start appreciating the organisms that treat slowness as a skill. When you picture Arctic life, you probably imagine the obvious celebrities: polar bears, caribou, seals, the dramatic ones that end up on posters. But most life out here is quieter, smaller, and frankly, better organized. It lives close to the ground, close to the snow, close to whatever thin advantage it can find. You begin to see the tundra as a low city, built in layers, a carpet of mosses, a scatter of lichens, sedges that bend instead of snapping, tiny shrubs that creep along the surface using snow as insulation. Plants do not just tolerate the Arctic, they exploit it. Being low means the wind passes over you instead of through you. Being compact means you trap warmth in still air pockets. Being slow means you do not waste energy trying to grow in a season that lasts 5 minutes. And the lichens, they are the quiet champions of inconvenience. A lichen is not one organism. It is a partnership. Fungus and algae, sometimes with bacteria involved too. A small cooperative surviving by sharing jobs. The algae makes sugars using the weak Arctic sunlight in summer. The fungus holds water, offers structure, protects the algae from drying out. Together, they colonize bare rock and start the slow process of making it more livable. Lichens can survive being frozen solid. They can dry out and go dormant. Then they can wake up again when moisture returns. It is not glamorous, but it is effective, which is the Arctic's preferred aesthetic. And these living skins feed the bigger animals. Caribou scrape through snow to reach lichen mats. In winter, those mats are like pantry shelves, low, dependable, and difficult to access. So the caribou become travelers. They move not because they are restless, but because snow depth and wind decide where food is reachable. You start noticing how wind shapes grazing routes. Ridges exposed to strong wind can have thinner snow because the wind scours it away. Low areas collect drifts and become too deep to dig efficiently. So a herd reads the landscape like a practical map. They follow high ground. They cross valleys carefully. They budget energy with every step. In polar night, you might not see the herd until it is close, but you may hear it first, soft clacking from hooves, a faint rustle of many bodies moving through cold air. A smell, too, warm animal breath, musk, the faint organic note that says life is passing through. And you realize something simple. In the dark season, the Arctic is not empty. It is just running on low power. The animals that stay active have thick insulation, fur, fat, feathers built for losing heat slowly. They have smaller extremities, short ears, short tails, less surface area to bleed warmth. It is called Allen's rule, if you want the tidy term. But you do not need the tidy term to understand it. You only need to look at an Arctic fox. The Arctic fox is compact. The desert fox has oversized ears like satellite dishes. In the desert, ears dump heat. In the Arctic, ears are liabilities. Nature does not do fashion. Nature does accounting, and you are not exempt from that accounting. You learn quickly that you cannot just eat when you feel like it. You eat to stay warm. You eat to keep your hands working. You eat because your body burns fuel faster in cold, even if you are doing nothing dramatic. In polar night, the simplest tasks demand more energy. Melting snow for water, keeping a stove running, shoveling drifting snow away from doors and vents, walking a short distance in heavy layers that resist every movement. In a temperate place, you might call this inconvenient. Here, it becomes the whole rhythm, and the rhythm reshapes your sense of what counts as a good day. A good day is when the generator starts without complaint. A good day is when the wind stays reasonable. A good day is when the sea ice does not surprise you with a new crack where you expected continuity. A good day is boring, and that is the point. Because boredom in the Arctic is a sign that the systems are holding, and you start noticing the systems everywhere, in buildings, in clothing, in how people store food, in how they plan for the moment something breaks. Human habits in polar night are not built around romance. They are built around friction and how to reduce it. You approach a house in an Arctic settlement and you see it raised slightly, often on pilings. Not because it looks nice, but because it keeps the warm building from heating the permafrost. It also helps with snow drifting. Wind can move under the structure instead of piling snow against walls. The shape of the building matters too. Sharp corners can create big drifts. A simple roofline sheds snow and reduces the weird sculpting the wind likes to do. You begin to notice that many places have small entry rooms, vestibules, a human-sized airlock. You step into the vestibule, close the outer door, and only then open the inner door. That small pause saves heat. It also saves sanity, because nothing is more annoying than watching warm air you paid for rush out into the indifferent night. Inside, warmth has a smell. It smells like drying fabric. It smells like food stored for winter. It smells faintly of fuel, because fuel is how warmth happens, and the light inside is chosen carefully. People do not blast harsh brightness all day because there is no day. Instead, they use warm lamps, softer bulbs, light that suggests evening even when the clock insists it is noon, because your brain is not impressed by clocks. Your brain wants cycles, so you manufacture them. You set routines not because you are disciplined, but because the alternative is drifting. Meals at steady times, work tasks in blocks, rest periods that match something like a normal schedule, even though outside the window is the same black-blue dimness it has been for weeks. In research stations, the routine can feel like living inside a carefully managed experiment. Lights on at a certain hour, breakfast, equipment checks, weather logs, maintenance, then indoor work, because outdoor work is sometimes just a fancy way to get frostbite. In small communities, routines become communal. Someone plows a road. Someone checks on the water supply. Someone hauls fuel. Someone runs a little store with shelves that look like they were stocked in another season. Because they were. And the supply chain is always there in the background, quiet but heavy. In many Arctic places, heavy supplies arrive in a short summer window. Ships come when sea ice retreats enough to allow passage. Fuel, building materials, bulk food, everything that cannot be made locally arrives then. In winter, the sea becomes a different kind of road. Sometimes ice roads form, routes over frozen rivers, lakes, or even sea ice depending on conditions and location. An ice road sounds like a joke until you see it. A marked path over white emptiness, poles or reflectors set in lines, vehicles moving slowly because speed is arrogance. The ice must be thick enough and it must be cold enough for long enough, and even then, weight limits matter because ice is strong, but it is not infinitely strong. Its strength depends on thickness, temperature, and internal flaws. Cracks and bubbles and brine pockets change the math, and the math is not forgiving. If you drive on ice, you do not just drive, you listen. You listen for the low booming that can travel through a frozen sheet when it flexes. You notice vibrations that feel wrong. You watch for dark patches, slush, areas swept clear by wind where the ice might be thinner. On some roads, crews drill holes to measure thickness. They mark unsafe areas. They close routes when conditions change. Because the Arctic does not care that your groceries are on the other side. Sometimes air travel is the lifeline instead. Small planes, larger cargo flights when runways allow. But storms can ground flights for days, and darkness makes everything harder. You learn to live with uncertainty in the practical sense, not philosophical uncertainty, literal uncertainty about whether the plane arrives. So people store freezers, pantries, fuel tanks. Redundancy becomes a virtue. You also learn that machines behave differently in deep cold. Oil thickens, rubber stiffens, metal contracts, batteries lose capacity faster because chemical reactions slow. If you leave a vehicle sitting too long without preparation, it may refuse to start. Not out of spite, just physics. So engines may be kept warm with block heaters. Vehicles may be plugged in like, in some places, you see cords running from houses to trucks. little electrical umbilicals keeping the machine cooperative. And if you are in a remote camp, you keep spare parts. Because waiting for delivery is not always an option. Even simple things become rituals. Checking fuel levels, checking heaters, checking that vents are clear of snow. Snow is light, but it accumulates like unpaid bills. It drifts against doors, it buries equipment, it blocks airflow. A blocked vent can turn a warm shelter into a dangerous one. Carbon monoxide, there is the quiet threat again. A gas you cannot see, cannot smell, cannot negotiate with. So you clear snow, often. Boring work done repeatedly because it keeps you alive. This is what surviving polar night looks like most of the time. It looks like maintenance. It is not a dramatic fight with nature. It is a steady agreement. If you do your part, the environment might allow you to continue. And while you are living inside these routines, you occasionally get reminded that you are living inside a larger machine. Sometimes it is a sound, sea ice groaning louder than usual because pressure changed. Sometimes it is a sudden shift in temperature, air warming quickly, then cooling again, leaving a crust on everything. Sometimes it is a smell that seems out of place, a faint sea smell carried inland, a hint of vegetation during a brief thaw, as if the ground exhaled something old. In the Arctic, even smells can feel geological, because so much of what you breathe and touch and stand on is shaped by deep time. Consider the fjords again. If you stand near the edge of a fjord in polar night, you might not see the far side clearly, but you can sense the walls. Steep rock rising out of darkness, the silhouette of slopes that drop straight into water. A fjord is an absence created by ice. A glacier once filled this valley completely, heavy enough to grind bedrock. It carved below sea level, because ice does not care where sea level is. When the ice retreated, the sea moved in. Now you have a long ocean finger reaching deep into land, often with a shallow sill near the mouth. That sill is like a speed bump for ocean water. It can trap dense cold water inside the fjord basin. It shapes oxygen, nutrients, and the whole underwater ecosystem. In some fjords, the water can become layered and stubborn. Fresh water from rivers sits on top. Salt water sits beneath. Mixing happens, but not always easily. In polar night, the surface might freeze in sheltered sections, or it might stay open because tidal currents keep it moving. Either way, the fjord becomes a corridor for sound. A small noise, an ice crack, a distant engine can echo off the walls and travel. It makes the landscape feel closer, like the darkness is compressing space. And somewhere in that darkness, glaciers still move. Not necessarily right in front of you, not always obvious. But higher in valleys, ice continues its slow downhill creep. It is constant pressure, constant deformation. If the glacier terminates in water, calving can happen year-round. Even in winter, the ice fractures, a slab breaks loose, and gravity does what it does. The splash can be muffled by distance, but the low rumble carries. Sometimes the calving triggers waves that travel under sea ice or along the fjord. Sometimes the new iceberg rolls, exposing cleaner blue ice that was once hidden. Blue ice is not dyed. It is compressed with fewer air bubbles, absorbing red light and letting blue dominate. It looks like a gemstone that forgot to be valuable, and then it drifts slowly into darkness, becoming part of the floating clutter of the Arctic. You start seeing the Arctic as a place of moving solids. Sea ice moves, glacier ice moves, even permafrost can move when it slumps and flows in thawed layers. Solids here behave like slow liquids. Liquids here behave like stubborn solids. It is a strange place to build a life if you prefer predictable boundaries. But humans have always been good at living in contradictions. So people hunt, fish, travel, build, repair, and tell stories. Stories are not decoration. They are another kind of survival tool. In a long night, stories create internal weather. They give your mind something to walk through when walking outside is not wise. And the stories that come out of Arctic regions often have a consistent theme. Respect the place. Do not assume you are in charge. Pay attention, because paying attention is how you avoid becoming a cautionary tale. If you are traveling outside a settlement, you learn the quiet discipline of preparation. You pack layers even if you think you will not need them. You carry a way to make shelter. You carry extra fuel. You tell someone where you are going, not because you are pessimistic, because you are experienced enough to be realistic. In polar night, losing your way does not require drama. It can happen in gentle conditions. With a simple mistake, you follow tracks that drift over, you assume a distant light is closer than it is. You misjudge terrain because darkness hides depth. Snow can fill depressions and make them look flat. A small creek can become a hidden trench. A pressure ridge can be buried, turning into a sudden obstacle. So you move with humility. And humility is easier if you understand what the Arctic is actually made of. Not the romantic version, just the physical one. The tundra, for example, is not simply a flat snowy plain. Under the snow, it is often a patchwork of peat, soil, ice wedges, and shallow water bodies. Peat forms when plant material accumulates faster than it decomposes. Cold, wet conditions slow microbial activity. So mosses and sedges build layers. Over centuries, those layers become thick. Peat is like a sponge, holding water. It is also a carbon vault, organic material stored because the cold keeps the lock engaged. In winter, peat freezes. In summer, the top can thaw into a wet, soft surface that makes travel exhausting. This is why tundra can be harder to cross in summer than in winter. Winter gives you a frozen surface, sometimes. Summer gives you mud, water, insects, and the slow misery of sinking. So, polar night has its own strange convenience. But even winter travel depends on snow conditions. Hard crust can hinder, and wind can make both happen in different places within a few kilometers. That is why Arctic travelers look at the ground so much. Not just at the sky, not just at the horizon. You look for sastrugi, wind-sculpted ridges of hard snow. They form like frozen dunes, aligned with prevailing wind direction. Sastrugi can be small, like ripples, or they can be tall enough to jolt a sled and bruise your patience. They make travel bumpy. They also act like compass clues. If you know the usual wind direction, you can read which way the ridges point, but the ridges can change after storms. So you keep updating your mental map. Again, boring, steady attention. And while you are busy with surface details, the deeper Arctic continues its own work. Permafrost does not just sit there. It interacts with snow cover, vegetation, and temperature in complicated ways. A thick snow layer can insulate the ground, keeping it warmer through winter. That can sound nice until you remember the permafrost prefers cold, so more snow can sometimes mean warmer ground, which can mean deeper thaw in summer. The system has these small ironies. Vegetation also insulates. A mossy surface can keep summer warmth from penetrating too deeply. If vegetation is disturbed by vehicles, construction, or erosion, more heat can enter the ground. Then thaw begins, ground settles, and you get thermokarst again. Slumps, pits, uneven surfaces. In some areas, you can see whole hillsides sagging. The upper layer slides slowly as ice within the soil melts. Along riverbanks, thaw can expose frozen sediments. The river undercuts the bank, and chunks collapse into the water. This is thermal erosion. Water not just wearing away soil mechanically, but melting ice within it. It can happen surprisingly fast in warmer seasons. In winter, it pauses, but the damage is already scheduled for next summer. The coastline has its own version. In parts of Alaska, Siberia, and northern Canada, you get ice-rich coastal bluffs. They look solid from a distance, but they are full of frozen ground ice. When storms bring waves against those bluffs, the water eats away at the base. Undercutting leads to collapse. Large sections can fall in a single event, so you have this strange scene, an ancient frozen coastline retreating rapidly, not because it is warm, but because the ocean is persistent. The sea does not care how long the ground has been frozen. The sea is the great equalizer. It will take anything, eventually, and turn it into sediment. And that sediment becomes part of another system. Rivers carry sediment to deltas. Coastal currents move it along shore. Sea ice can even transport sediment, picking up material in shallow areas, freezing it in, then drifting and dropping it elsewhere when it melts. So, the Arctic is not a sealed freezer. It is a conveyor moving material around quietly. And you, living through polar night, are temporarily inside that conveyor. You might be in a town built near a river mouth, or on an island where sea ice is the winter bridge, or at a research station perched on rock, chosen because rock is stable compared to permafrost. Wherever you are, your daily life is shaped by these processes. Even if you do not talk about them aloud, you shovel snow because wind deposits it. Wind deposits it because pressure systems move across the ocean. Those pressure systems are shaped by temperature gradients between equator and pole. And those gradients are influenced by sea ice extent. It is all connected, but you do not need to chase every connection tonight. You only need to feel the idea. This place is part of a larger circulation. That becomes obvious when weather changes abruptly. In polar regions, air masses can shift quickly. A storm can bring warmer air from the south, raising temperatures close to freezing. Then the storm passes, and colder air returns, dropping temperatures sharply. This creates the dreaded freeze-thaw cycle. Snow surface melts slightly, then refreezes into crust. Everything becomes slick, sharp, and annoyingly more complicated. For animals, crust can be a problem. Caribou may find it harder to dig through. Predators may run more easily on top. For you, crust can mean easier walking in some places and surprising slips in others. It can also mean your gear becomes coated in ice. Clothing stiffens with frost. Zippers stick. Straps freeze into shapes. And the air itself can do strange things. In very cold, calm conditions, normally air gets colder with altitude, but in an inversion, cold, dense air settles near the surface and warmer air sits above. This can trap moisture and create fog. It can trap pollution in towns, creating a haze even in a place that feels pristine. It can make hilltops warmer than valleys, which feels wrong until you remember cold air sinks. Inversions also affect sound. Sound can travel farther, bending through layers, so you might hear a distant snowmobile as if it is nearby. You might hear dogs barking from far across town. The darkness already makes distance uncertain. And now the air joins in. Congratulations! Even your ears are being lied to by physics. And still, people adapt. In some communities, dogs are still part of winter life. Not as a romantic relic, but as practical muscle and companionship. In other places, snowmobiles do most of the work. They are loud, they smell like fuel, and they break at the worst times. Both are forms of movement tuned to snow. Movement matters because the Arctic is not one uniform surface. It is a patchwork of safe and unsafe, exposed and sheltered. If you travel along the coast, you learn to respect sea ice edges. Ice near shore can be stable, anchored to land. This is fast ice. Farther out, pack ice drifts more freely. The boundary between them can be complicated. Cracks can form along that seam. Pressure can build ridges. Open water can appear, then close again. Currents can thin ice from below. Snow can insulate ice from above, slowing thickening. So even in the coldest months, the ice is not one consistent slab. It is a quilt of different ages and strengths. Some indigenous hunters have detailed local knowledge of these patterns, not abstract science. Practical observation passed down and updated continuously. They know where currents usually run. They know which winds open leads. They know which areas to avoid after certain storms. This kind of knowledge is not just culture. It is survival data, and it is flexible. Because the Arctic is changing, sea ice forms later in many areas and breaks up earlier. Ice can be thinner, more mobile, less predictable. That does not mean people immediately stop living here. It means the rules shift and people have to adjust. Adjusting might mean shorter travel seasons on ice. It might mean different hunting routes. It might mean more reliance on boats in shoulder seasons. It might mean building infrastructure differently because permafrost stability changes. So polar night is not just a seasonal experience. It sits inside a longer trend. But you can keep that thought gentle. You do not need to panic about it tonight. You only need to acknowledge that this landscape is not a museum exhibit. It is an active system, and you are one of the temporary guests. Temporary is a word the Arctic encourages you to accept, because even the most solid-looking features are borrowed. A snowdrift is borrowed shape. A sea ice road is borrowed ground. A permafrost foundation is borrowed stability. Even glaciers, massive, ancient-looking, are borrowed water, stored for a time, then released. In summer, That release becomes meltwater rivers. They carry rock flour. They feed fjords. They deliver sediment. In winter, they slow again, but they do not stop. So the landscape you see in polar night is just one posture in a long movement. And this brings you back to something you can feel without needing any charts. The Arctic makes you think in cycles, not motivational cycles, physical ones, freeze and thaw, accumulation and melt, advance and retreat, darkness and light. Even if you never see a sunrise for weeks, you know the sun is still part of the system. It is just taking the long way around. And the earth keeps turning regardless of your opinion. That thought can be comforting, but it can also feel a little eerie because it highlights how little your preferences matter out here. You can want warmth, the air stays cold. You can want light, the sky stays dim. So you learn to find comfort in smaller things. The sound of a heater working steadily, the sight of frost patterns on a window, delicate and ridiculous, the reliable taste of something hot. You learn to enjoy the way indoor spaces become worlds. A kitchen table becomes a map room, a workshop, a social center. A hallway becomes a drying rack for gloves and boots. A corner becomes storage for emergency gear because emergencies are not rare enough to ignore. Even entertainment adapts. People play sports indoors. They gather for community events. They create brightness with decorations, not because it changes the sky, but because it changes the mind. And the mind matters, because polar night is not only hard on the body, it can be hard on mood. Lack of sunlight affects circadian rhythms. It can affect vitamin D levels. It can contribute to seasonal depression in some people. Communities respond in various ways. Bright indoor lighting at certain times, outdoor time during twilight hours, social connection, keeping routines, keeping movement. In some places, people treat the return of the sun as a real event, not a metaphor, an actual celebration. They will climb a hill when they know the first sunlight will crest the horizon. They will watch a thin beam touch a mountain ridge, then slide slowly down. Because when you have lived without direct sun for weeks, even a small angle of light feels like a visitor. But you are not there yet. For now, you are still inside the long dark, so you pay attention to other forms of light. Moonlight, when the moon is up, can be surprisingly useful. Snow reflects light well, so the landscape can look faintly luminous. Starlight is weaker, but on clear nights, the sky can feel crowded with it. The Milky Way can be visible as a pale river overhead. In some Arctic locations, air is dry enough in winter that clarity improves. Less haze, fewer particles, sharper stars. And then there are the practical lights, headlamps, street lights, windows glowing warm. Artificial light changes how snow looks. Under sodium streetlights, snow can look orange. Under cold LEDs, it can look bluish and sterile. Either way, light creates contrast, and contrast is comforting. It gives your eyes something to hold on to, because in polar night, the hardest part is not always the cold. Sometimes it is the sameness. The landscape can look identical day after day. Darkness, snow, wind, darkness, snow, wind again. So you learn to notice small differences. A new drift behind the same building. A different pattern of frost on the same window. A slight change in the sound of the sea ice. hinting at a new crack somewhere. These tiny observations become your markers of time. They replace sunsets and sunrises, and gradually you start to sense the deeper forces again. Ice, rock, and time, always pushing. Because while your life is measured in days and weeks, the Arctic's architecture is measured in millennia. Glaciers built and carved fjords during ice ages, when ice sheets spread across continents. Sea level was lower then, exposing land that is underwater now. When ice melted, sea level rose, flooding valleys. Isostatic rebound, there is that yoga-sounding term again, also plays a role. When ice sheets sit on land, their weight pushes the crust down. When they melt, the crust slowly rebounds upward. In some Arctic regions, land is still rising from the loss of ice thousands of years ago. Coastlines shift. Old beaches end up stranded inland. New land emerges slowly, as if the planet is exhaling after a long compression. This means the maps are not eternal. They are just snapshots, and you, in polar night, are living on one of those snapshots. Sometimes you can see evidence of rebound and sea level change in raised beaches, ridges of rounded stones above the current shoreline. In darkness, you might not notice them clearly, but the landforms are there, waiting for someone to look in summer light. You can see it in how fjords have sills and basins, shaped by where glaciers eroded most strongly. You can see it in how islands and peninsulas are arranged, often following bedrock structure, fault lines, and glacial scouring. Even the sea ice you walk on is shaped by these larger patterns. Coastlines funnel wind, narrow straits accelerate currents, shallow shelves allow ice to ground and pile up. So the Arctic is not random. It is patterned, just not patterned for your convenience. And this is where the long night starts to feel less like an absence and more like a lens. Without sunlight distractions, you become more aware of texture, sound, and structure. You notice the way your boots squeak at certain temperatures. That squeak is not imagination. Very cold snow can squeak because the crystals are hard and dry, rubbing together. At warmer temperatures, snow tends to be quieter, more damp, more compressible, so your ears become thermometers. You also notice the way your breath behaves. In extreme cold, your exhale can form ice crystals quickly. A scarf can frost up. Facial hair, if you have it, can collect rime. Rime is frost formed when supercooled water droplets freeze on contact. It builds feathery, windward coatings on surfaces. You see it on poles, ropes, even on eyebrows. It is beautiful in a quiet way, like the world is growing white fur. But it is also weight. On structures, rime adds load. On equipment, it adds stiffness. On anything that needs to move smoothly, it adds irritation. The Arctic loves irritation. It is one of its main hobbies. And yet, people still manage small comforts. Hot drinks matter, not only for warmth, but for routine. The act of heating water, holding a warm cup, taking slow sips. These are tiny rituals that anchor you. Food becomes simple and dense. Fat is valuable. Calories are practical. Historically, many Arctic diets relied heavily on marine mammals and fish, not because people were being extreme, but because those foods were available and energy-rich. Seal, whale, fish, foods that carry fat and nutrients. In a place where plants are seasonal and limited, the ocean becomes the pantry. And the ocean is generous. if you can access it safely. In polar night, access often means knowing where open water persists. Paul and Yas again, those stubborn patches that refuse to freeze. Paul and Yas can be crucial for wildlife. They provide breathing access for marine mammals. They provide hunting grounds for predators. They provide feeding areas for birds that overwinter. They also influence local climate a bit, because open water releases heat and moisture. The air above can be slightly warmer and foggier. If you stand downwind of open water in deep cold, you can sometimes see ice fog, a low, shimmering haze of tiny ice crystals created when moisture freezes in the air. It can sparkle in artificial light, it can reduce visibility, it can coat surfaces with frost. So even open water has consequences. Everything here has consequences. And that is the strange comfort. If you let it be one, cause and effect are clear. In many parts of modern life, consequences are delayed and abstract. Here, consequences are immediate. Ignore wind direction, and your shelter drifts in. Ignore snow conditions, and you exhaust yourself in an hour. Ignore equipment maintenance, and it fails when you need it. The Arctic is harsh, but it is honest. And honesty can be restful in a grim way. You stop expecting the world to be gentle. You stop being surprised when it is not. You begin to match the environment's steadiness with your own. That steadiness shows up in how you move. Slowly, deliberately, with attention. It shows up in how you plan. Extra time, extra fuel, extra layers. It shows up in how you think about risk. Not as fear, but as probability. And the longer you stay in polar night, the more your mind drifts toward the largest timescale of all. Because you can feel the planet turning, even if you cannot see the sun. You can feel it in the slight change in twilight over weeks, a faint brightening at midday that lasts a little longer, a sky that shifts from pure dark to deep blue more often. It is subtle at first, easy to miss if you are not paying attention. But you are paying attention now because the Arctic trained you to. You start to sense that the cycle is moving. The darkness is not permanent. It is just long. And you begin thinking about how many times this has happened before. How many winters have passed over this same coastline? How many times sea ice formed and broke, formed and broke again? How many times glaciers advanced in colder ages, then retreated in warmer ones? How many times permafrost thickened, then thinned? The Arctic has been through climates your mind would struggle to imagine. It has been warmer, with forests farther north. It has been colder, with ice sheets sprawling. This is not a stable world with a stable script. It is a world that swings slowly between different states, and you, for a brief time, are living through one version of the swing. That realization can shrink your personal anxieties, not because your problems are not real, but because they are not ancient. The Arctic does not care about your deadlines. It does not know what day it is. It barely knows what year it is. It knows only energy balance. Sunlight in, heat out, wind moving, water freezing and melting. And that is the comfort of deep time. It's indifference, because indifference is predictable. You do not have to impress the Arctic. You cannot negotiate with it. You can only adapt and accept. So in the dark season, you let routines hold you. You let small lights make indoor space feel human. You let the wind do its rewriting outside. because it will do it anyway. You let the sea ice groan and settle. You let the permafrost stay frozen, for now, like a memory that refuses to thaw. You let glaciers keep their slow movement because they have always been slow. And when you look up into the black sky, you remember that even this darkness is part of a rotation. Earth turning like a tired machine that never stops, carrying you through the shadowed side toward a place where the rules will be different again. Not better, just different. Because somewhere else on this same planet, survival means managing heat instead of cold. It means finding water instead of avoiding it. It means enduring sunlight that does not set, or sunlight that feels like a punishment. And that thought hangs there, gently, as you remain in the Arctic night a little longer, listening to the quiet systems work and waiting for the faintest shift in the sky to prove, eventually, that the cycle is still moving. The proof arrives the way most Arctic truths arrive, quietly and without fanfare. A few minutes of deeper blue at midday, a thin brightening that looks almost like someone cleaned the inside of the sky. You do not celebrate yet because you have learned better than that. You just notice it the way you notice ice tightening or wind easing, a small change in a system that never asks your permission. And if you stay with that thought long enough, you begin to feel the planet as a moving object. Not a map, not a home, not a storybook globe. A rotating body with seasons glued to its skin, like paint that never fully dries. The Arctic polar night is not an exception. It is what happens when a tilted world keeps turning. You are simply stationed where the geometry feels personal, somewhere far south from you. In the same hour, someone is squinting into sunlight. They are complaining about glare, about heat on their face, about the day going on too long. They do not realize you would trade them, briefly, just to remember the color of morning. But you also know something they do not yet know. Light can be exhausting too. Endless day is its own kind of pressure, like a song on repeat. So you accept this darkness as one half of an honest bargain. A season of concealment followed by a season of reveal. Freeze, then thaw, then freeze again. And the deeper comfort is that the Arctic has done this before you. Long before headlamps, long before heated vestibules, long before anyone argued about what year it is. The cycle kept going, with or without witnesses. You start thinking about repetition and what it does to land. Not dramatic, one-time disasters, but the steady tapping of the same process. Like a slow drip in a cave, building a stone shape you will never see finished. Here, the drip is cold, freeze, crack, settle, freeze, crack, settle again. The sea ice you walked across earlier will not be the same sea ice next year. Even if it forms in the same place, it will have different seams, different ridges, different weak spots, different stories written into it. Some years, the ice is thick and stubborn. Other years, it stays thin and moves too easily. A winter floor that feels less like flooring and more like a suggestion. Glaciers do the same kind of repetition, just slower. They build up snow in quiet basins, then flow it outward over decades. They shave rock, then drop the shavings, then repeat. If you could speed up time, the fjord walls would look restless. Rock fall in little bursts, ice advancing, then retreating, like the coastline is breathing. And when you zoom out even farther, you remember that the Arctic itself has migrated, not on a map, but in climate. Tundra replaced by forest. In warmer ages, ice sheets sprawling when the planet cooled. The land under you has worn many costumes. Tonight, it wears the dark. Human life here is built around that kind of patience, not always willingly, but effectively. People store food because the sea will not always cooperate. They build redundancy because the weather will not respect a single plan. They learn that comfort is less about winning and more about not losing. And that is why the most important Arctic skill is something that sounds boring. It is called margin. Extra fuel, extra time, an extra layer you hope you never need. Margin is what you carry when you understand that the environment is not sentimental. It will not admire your optimism. It will just wait for it to fail. So you become quietly conservative with your choices. You do not walk onto new ice because it looks smooth. You do not drive the ice road because you feel lucky. You do it because you checked, and someone else checked, and the cold has been steady. Even then, you stay humble because humility weighs almost nothing, and it travels well. The Arctic also teaches you a soft truth about noise. In the city, noise is constant, so you stop hearing it. Here, sound is rare, so it becomes meaningful. A distant dog team, the runners whispering over hard snow, a snowmobile far off, its engine a steady insect hum, a ship's horn under a low ceiling of cloud, reminding you there is open water somewhere. Even the buildings make sounds. Wood contracting, metal shifting, a heater ticking as it expands and cools. You learn the voices of your shelter. You can tell when the wind has changed by which wall complains. You can tell when the temperature dropped by how the door seal behaves. Congratulations, you have become the kind of person who can diagnose weather by listening to a hinge. It is not glamorous, but it is accurate. And accuracy is its own comfort, because it means you can predict. A little, not the big things, not the storms that arrive like decisions already made, but the small things. You know when your gloves will stiffen. You know how long it takes a pot of snow to become water. You know how quickly a wet sock becomes a problem. In polar night, problems do not announce themselves loudly. They start small, then multiply in the quiet. A tiny tear in a mitten becomes numb fingertips. Numb fingertips become clumsy work. Clumsy work becomes a longer exposure outside. So, you handle tiny things with respect, like they are the seeds of disasters, because out here, they are. That is the strange piece of it. You do not waste energy pretending you are invincible. You do not waste energy being surprised by reality. And slowly, your mind stops fighting the season. It stops begging the sky for proof. You begin to treat the darkness like a landscape in itself. Not empty, just reduced. Reduced colors, reduced distances, reduced expectations. And that reduction makes room for something else. A calmer kind of attention. You might find yourself watching the simplest phenomena for longer than you would elsewhere. The way frost feathers along the edge of a window pane. The way a headlamp beam fills with glittering ice crystals. Then clears again. You might even watch your own breath, not as a relaxation trick, but as weather. It billows, then vanishes, depending on wind. It forms a brief cloud, then is stolen. You are not just in the Arctic, you are participating in its microclimate. Every exhale is moisture introduced to a dry system. Every step compresses snow into a different texture. It is small, but it is real, and it makes you feel less like a visitor and more like a temporary ingredient. Outside, the long night keeps holding, but it is no longer a blank. In clear conditions, you can watch the stars wheel slowly, a motion you feel rather than track. And sometimes, if the sky is generous, the aurora returns, not as a grand finale, more like a reminder that the sun is still working somewhere. The aurora drifts overhead in pale green sheets, too high to touch. It does not warm you, it does not light your path. It simply exists like a message delivered to the wrong address. And the message is simple. Earth is connected to space. Your atmosphere is not sealed. Your magnetic field is not decoration. The sky is an interface where particles arrive and collide and leave light behind. It is cosmic, yes, but it is also routine. The planet runs its systems whether you are watching or not. And that brings you back, again, to deep time, to the idea that what feels endless to you is often just a brief chapter to the land. Polar night feels long because your body wants light, but the land has lived through longer waits. It has waited through ice ages. It has waited through seas rising. It has waited through the slow lift of isostatic rebound, the ground rising like a very tired elevator. In places where the crust is still rebounding, the shoreline is not fixed. A beach from long ago can end up stranded inland. A harbor can slowly become shallower, forcing people to adjust. The planet is always adjusting. Even when it looks still, it is repositioning itself, millimeter by millimeter. That is why the Arctic can feel oddly calming. Despite everything, it is honest about motion. It does not pretend stability is permanent. And in a world where humans love to promise permanence, that honesty can feel like relief. No one expects a promise from sea ice. No one expects loyalty from wind, so you stop asking for it. You just work with what is in front of you. In that spirit, you also stop thinking of survival as a heroic test. Surviving polar night is mostly the art of staying ordinary. You check the weather. You keep the entryway clear. You eat before you are starving, and rest before you are broken. You keep your world small enough to manage, and you let the big world do what it does. Outside the window, the night holds the snow in its quiet grip. The drifts are sculpted into smooth shapes that will vanish in the next storm. The sea ice is shifting in slow arguments, tightening and loosening with wind and tide. And below it all, the ocean keeps sliding. Layered water moving heat around like a secret. Currents tracing paths older than any settlement. There is a particular comfort in imagining that hidden motion, because it means the world is not stuck. It is only paused at the surface. Even your own life, up here, is like that. Paused in darkness, but still moving inside. Days pass, marked by meals and chores. Weeks pass, marked by supply checks and weather windows. And then, one day, you notice the shift more clearly. Not a sunrise, not yet, but a longer twilight. a faint color in the south, a hint that the sun is thinking about returning. You can understand the geometry without making it complicated. As Earth continues its orbit, the tilt stops aiming you so directly away from sunlight. The sun's path inches closer to the horizon. At first, it still does not rise. It just approaches. A pale band appears at midday, a suggestion of light that never quite commits. And then, eventually, the first direct sunlight touches something high. A mountain ridge, if you have one. A rooftop. A hill. The light arrives like a shy visitor. It does not flood the world. It just touches briefly and leaves again. But it is enough to remind you that the cycle is real and reliable. People in some Arctic towns will gather for this, not because they are dramatic, but because they are human. They will stand outside, bundled and quiet, and watch the first sunlight slide across a distant slope. No speeches necessary, no big announcements, just a collective acknowledgement that the planet kept its appointment. And you, standing there in the cold, can feel how small and how safe that truth is. Small because it has nothing to do with your personal life. Safe because it will happen regardless. The sun does not return as a gift. It returns because the math of the solar system says it must. And that is the final comfort of deep time. Not that everything will be fine, but that the larger rhythms are steady, even when smaller ones are not. The Arctic taught you this in the bluntest way possible, by taking away the day and letting you live anyway. It taught you that warmth is something you maintain, that light is something you borrow, that ground is sometimes water pretending. It taught you that survival is mostly competence, and competence is mostly repetition. Simple tasks done carefully with enough margin to absorb surprises. And now, with the faintest edge of returning twilight, you can let that lesson settle, not as a warning, not as a challenge, just as a quiet fact about the kind of planet you live on. A planet that turns, whether you watch or sleep. A planet that freezes and cracks, then melts and flows, then freezes again. A planet that does not rush and does not stop, so the polar night can remain what it always was. Not a villain, not a mystery, just a season doing its work. And as your thoughts drift, you can imagine the Earth continuing its slow rotation, carrying you away from this dark coastline and towards some other far place, another environment with its own hard rules and its own strange comforts. Somewhere sand is moving like water. Somewhere a river is cutting stone like a patient saw. Somewhere heat is the problem instead of cold. But that is for another night. For now, the Arctic stays quiet, the ice keeps its slow conversation, and the sky holds its